Hey traders, Raghee here, and in this recap video we are going to cover the Nas today. So yesterday I talked a bit about the way that we entered that trade on the sell-off yesterday, and I'm going to talk to you guys today about how that trade followed through, what some of the signs were, and why we went ahead and got out of the trade, or at least moved into a break-even stop type scenario. So let's jump into it. So this was an NQ trade. Now, the same trade did not trigger on the ES or the YM because the tech-led sell-off really lent itself best to buying into the weakness on the NQ. It was overdone. Now, how would I even define what's overdone? I start that with a daily price movement range, and that's something that we do every day in the chat room. And that is to understand the historical price movement ranges that we see not only per day, but per hour. So first of all, the sell-off was 2 times the daily price movement range. So it was really an extreme. So I don't throw around words like extreme or too far, too fast without the underlying arithmetic to basically prove it, to actually show that we're moving far beyond the typical price movement range. Again, 2 times the typical price movement range. So that was one clue. And then where we actually landed on the daily time frame, even without understanding price movement ranges, was simply our classic buy signal, a classic trend following buy signal. And we had a number of zones ranging from aggressive to less aggressive to most conservative. All 3 were hit in terms of the way that we sold off. And this really follows the philosophy that we have in the room, which is always be on the offense. Always look up from the viewpoint of, how does this price action serve me? What does this reveal? What is this telling me about the market, and where is the opportunity? And that's where it might have felt uncomfortable, but that's where it made the most sense. Now, today, the narrative started to spin towards looking at the tax reform narrative. There were a bunch of individual stock names that I believe when you look at the QQQ, the NQ futures, and the heavier weighted names within that ETF and within that index, within that futures index, hit levels like a gap close on Apple at 168.11, like levels of support on Microsoft, Amazon, Google. So a number of these levels made sense. And if we find support in those heavier weighted names, that's where the individual stocks lend themselves very well to the futures, and then futures, of course, go back and lend themselves very well to the individual stocks. And going into the close, let's talk about the 5-minute here, because if the expectations are that this tax reform bill is going to go through, maybe in not a terrific fashion, maybe not in a way that's going to really thrill traders and investors, we could get a buy the rumor, sell the news type response. And this is where we start to understand 3 main times going into the closing session that we do live in the chat room every day. And that is 3:40, 4 o'clock, and 4:15. Understanding what happens at these 3 times helps us manage the trade. And we basically got out going into the 4 o'clock Eastern time frame saying, you know what, let's go ahead and take some profit off the table between 63.67 and 63.72. And that was the zone. And so now we go into the Asian session, and we'll look to see to either manage the remainder of the open position from a break-even standpoint, or re-enter depending upon the kind of reaction we get with what's happening with the different tax reform narratives, because there are plenty of them. So that's just a quick follow-up on the Nasdaq buy from yesterday, a few nuances in how we managed it. And this type of nuance, this type of management applies to every kind of trade that we have, whether it be our recent buy in the pound US and narratives surrounding Brexit and data that we've been getting out of the UK, or whether that's a narrative that's now got us looking at the copper market and a trade there. So again, the stories might be different, but the process is the same. So with that in mind, I'll see you in the next update.